Hey everyone, Sarah here, back with another video. So today we're not going to be talking about any sort of like genre discussions or writing techniques as such or anything like that. We're going to be talking about a couple of different sort of writing exercises you can do, something that you can do to help improve your skill as a writer. So first let's talk about why writing exercises are important. So it's important to remember that writing, like anything, is a skill. Obviously, some people will be naturally better than others. I do believe in talent. I do believe it is a thing, but I don't think it holds as much significance as a lot of people think it does. So no matter what your innate skill level is for something like writing, you should practice. Just like with other art forms, even like painting or drawing or music, you should spend a lot of time practicing the skill as well as actually doing, if that makes sense. So when you learn to paint, you learn by doing studies. You do master studies of other paintings and other artists. You copy from reference images. You practice basic skills and then you use those skills to do your own work. It's really hard to practice from imagination, to pull everything out from within yourself rather than looking at different material. And writing's the same. I mean, how many of us have sat down in front of a computer or a piece of paper and said, I'm going to write something, and you just have no idea what to do? That's why, just like with using reference images when you draw or paint, or using a master painting, like a master study to copy from, to practice, you should be using references when you practice writing as well. And by that I mean taking passages or ideas or scenes or characters from pieces of fiction that you like, maybe ones that you don't like, and using those as the basis for your own writing exercises. Not for your own writing, but for your practice, for your exercise. Okay, so now let's cover 3 different writing exercises which use reference material. So the first exercise is to take an opening line from a novel and continue off from that. Now, the point of this exercise is not to reproduce the opening to a novel. Although you will be using the opening line or lines, depending, the goal is to take that line and build off it using your own imagination. We're not trying to reproduce the story or the plot of the book that you've taken that opening line from. So, for example, here are some opening lines. 3 months ago, his grandmother died, and then they had moved to this house. I'm the King of the Castle by Susan Hill. Where is he? Oversea Under Stone by Susan Cooper. There was a lark singing somewhere high above. The Hollow Hills by Mary Stewart. The primroses were over. Watership Down by Richard Adams. So, looking at these opening lines, I want you to notice that 1, they don't specify character names and they don't specify locations. So when you're choosing opening lines for this exercise, you want them to be a bit vague. Because we're not trying to reproduce the same story, we're just using the opening line as inspiration, we want something that we can take in a different direction to the original. This exercise is for using, basically just giving yourself a tiny little building base, a tiny little platform to build off from. Because we all know that it's that first line, that first start of, how do I start writing this? What should I write? That is really difficult for a lot of people. So this exercise will help because you've already got that base there. You have that first line and it can spark some ideas in you and you can take it from there, basically. Okay, now exercise number 2. This one is about rewriting an existing scene. So in this exercise, You will take a scene from a book that you like, preferably one you like because you're probably more aware of its contents and you remember it a bit more easily, and try to rewrite it from memory. So compared to the previous exercise, this one is about reproducing the same story. In the same way, when you're learning to paint, you do master copies where you're trying to reproduce the same image as closely as possible. We want to do the same thing here with our writing. So for this exercise, you would grab a book that you like, or at least one that you sort of know well, and pick a scene. If you can think of one in your head that you sort of remember where it is, go with that because it'll make it a lot easier than having to, skim through the whole book to find something. So, and then you want to read just a scene, just sort of like a little section of it. It would, like, the length will depend on the book, obviously, but you want something a bit manageable. So just try to keep it to like one scene. You want to read this maybe once or twice. Don't take any notes. Think about it while you read it, obviously, but you don't want to be taking any notes down for it. And then put the book aside and see how well you can recreate it in your own words. Now, you don't need to be trying to reproduce it word for word, but we do want sort of, for example, we want the characters' dialogues to be basically sort of the same. We want the events to be in the same order. We want to try and get as much of it that we can remember down on the page in a similar fashion, but you can use your own words for it. Now, you don't want to be reading the book as you go because that's just rote copying, and it's not, it can help, but it's not the goal for this exercise. We want to put the book aside, not look at it, and see how much we can remember. So with this exercise, you'll probably actually notice that there are certain aspects of scenes that you remember quite clearly. Maybe you remember the dialogue really well, but not so much the narrative parts. Or maybe you remember this specific bit of description or narration, but you don't really remember the dialogue that well. And that's okay, because the whole point of this exercise is to try and see which parts are easier for you to remember, easier for you to recall and write, and which parts might not actually have as much sticking power. For example, let's say you took the book The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, and you chose, right towards the beginning of the book, there's the boating scene with Rat and Mole. Say you took that scene, you read it once or twice, and then you tried to rewrite it. See how accurately you can reproduce it. Or perhaps the tsunami scene at the start of Nation by Terry Pratchett. That's a very powerful scene. Maybe you could read that and then try to reproduce it and see how effective your version is compared to Terry Pratchett's. What parts did you miss out? How significant might those be to the effect that the writing has? Okay, moving on now to our last exercise, the third one. This one has to do with point of view. So this exercise is similar to this previous one in that you are trying to reproduce a scene from a book. However, you are doing it from a different character's point of view. So obviously with this one, you want to choose books that have a set point of view, or at least in the scene you want to write has a set point of view. It doesn't have to be first person, but you want a scene that has multiple characters and one that you can try to, tell it from a different point of view, from a different character's perspective. Again, grab a book that you like or that you know well, pick a scene, read it a couple of times, decide which character's point of view you want to write it from, and then try to reproduce the scene. Again, this exercise isn't quite as strict as the previous one in that we aren't trying to reproduce the scene totally accurately. It's not as heavily restricted as a, say, master study, but we do want to try and get it close. We want the events to be the same, but we want to explore characterization in this exercise. Again, we don't want to be checking the scene, reading through it as we try to write it. We just want to try and go off what we remember and what we understand of the scene already, and see how well we can reproduce something, see how well we can characterize the same scene from another character's perspective. So for example, maybe you would take the infamous apartment scene from The Great Gatsby, you know, when everyone's gathered into the apartment and everything's sort of coming to a head. Maybe you would take that scene and write it from Jordan's point of view. Maybe you could take a scene from Rosemary's Baby and write it from one of the neighbors' point of view, you know, one of the witches' point of view. You want to use this exercise to explore different perspectives and different ways to write characters, and being able to do that within a scene where you already know what's supposed to happen, it gives you that sort of extra nudge when you are using characters and scenes that already exist. Now, this exercise is good in that it's already got a lot set up for you, obviously. You have the characters, you have the scene, you know what's going to happen. You're basically just playing with dolls. You know, you're testing out certain things and you're trying your own thing, but you have this set sort of playground to do it in. So the benefits with these particular writing exercises is, as I just said, you have a starting point. So in the first exercise, you have an opening line to work with. You have just that one line and then you can go from there. You can take it however way you want. You don't have to reproduce the actual writing from the book. So that gives you a lot of flexibility, but with a bit of help, basically. Whereas the second and third exercises have a bit more restrictions, but they still give you that framework to sort of play around in. The second exercise obviously is, I would say, is the most restrictive because you are trying to produce a master study. You're trying to reproduce an actual copy from memory of a particular scene. While the third exercise is a character exploration where you can make stuff up as you want. You get to use the character, a different character in that scene, and you can be a bit more creative. The best part about using material, using references when you do your writing exercises in the same way you would when you're learning to paint or draw, is that you're not starting from absolutely nothing. It gives you a framework to build upon, and in the end, these are just exercises. These are not supposed to be your magnum opus. This is not supposed to go into a novel or, you know, into a magazine or anything like that. This is just to get you warmed up before you sit down and go into your actual writing, or, you know, to try and hone your skills. It's not there for you to show to everyone and say, this is my writing, look at this. It's a way to get the elasticity in your brain going, you know, get those muscles warmed up, to sharpen those skills, hone those skills, so that when you do go to your own writing, you can take all of these little bits and pieces that you've pulled out from other writers through these exercises and adapt them to your own needs. Now, obviously, you can't publish these things because it's not your writing as such. It's plagiarism if you do that. But this is just practice. It's the same way when you're a kid and you sat down and you wanted to draw a picture of something, you just copied the exact same thing. You know, you traced over it. And when you get better, you learn to draw your own things. This is the same thing. You're using other authors' work as reference material. So those are my 3 suggestions for writing exercises that use existing material as references, something to help you along, you know, a way to hone your skills while using the works of other writers, you know, that you might like or that you would like to emulate. I think it's always important to look at the way other writers have solved problems or the way they have expressed certain themes or gone about writing certain situations or characterizations. And using these sort of exercises will help you deepen your understanding of how they did it and also what you might need to work on. You know, you might find out that you're not actually that good at writing dialogue, but you nailed the descriptive language really well. Or, you know, you might find that you're not actually very good at at writing from the point of view of this sort of character, but you might be better from a different sort of character's point of view. And all of this is progress, and that's all we want out of these exercises. So that's it for today's video. I hope it helped. Let me know in the comments if you actually have any other ideas, what sort of exercises you might use for your writing. Yeah, and let me know if any of this helped, of course. Like and subscribe if you want to see more of my videos, because they will be here every week. And that's it. Hope it helped, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Keep those fingers on the keyboard, and I'll see you then. Bye.